Future trading involves risk and is not suitable for all investors. Content provided in this segment is meant for educational purposes and is not a solicitation to buy or sell commodities. Opinions and statements of guests not affiliated with EverAg are their own and do not reflect the views of EverAg. The accuracy of their statements cannot be guaranteed by EverAg.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Grain Feed brought to you by EverAg. This is your weekly news feed for all things grain and all things feed. Each week, we bring you updates on the markets with unique perspectives, an amazing team of analysts with the intention of helping dairy and livestock producers manage their risk. I'm your host, Jim Matthews, reporting from the Chicago office. Reporting from the home office in DFW, Director of Feed Procurement, Mr. Jake Kingsley. And for the first time on the Grain Feed, we're bringing in some expertise from the outside world, reporting from St. Louis, Chief Economist at the American Soybean Association, Mr. Scott Gerlt. Jake, how are things in Texas today?
Pretty good down here. We're nice and warm. Looks like maybe spring's right around the corner in Texas.
Good for you. Middle of January. That must be nice. Scott, we are very excited to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us. Good to have another bearded commodity market enthusiast on the show. How are things in St. Louis?
Oh, things are great here in St. Louis. A little rainy today, but we'll take it. But yeah, just glad and honored to be your first outside expert to serve in the show here. This is great.
Absolutely, it's great to have you. And Scott, we just have to ask. I don't think this was vetted. Are you a Cardinals fan?
I am a new Cardinals fan since I moved to St. Louis 2 years ago.
Okay.
So I grew up more in Royals country in Missouri. But now as a St. Louis resident, I am mandated to be a Cardinals fan.
I hear you. Okay, interesting. Okay, well, you're still welcome to be on the show. It's still nice to have you. Scott, before we kick off, would you mind just taking a brief moment to introduce yourself and the work that you do with the American Soybean Association?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm fortunate to serve as the chief economist here at the American Soybean Association, as you said. And ASA represents the soybean farmers in the U.S., over 500,000 of them, on policy, advocacy issues, some of the international trade stuff. And so I get to do the analysis, monitor markets, just do a lot of behind-the-scenes work. But I also get to have the opportunity to go out and talk about what's going on with folks like you all, which is part I really enjoy. Been doing this sort of work for a while. I've been at ASA for 2 to 3 years, but before that at the University of Missouri with a group called FAFRI, doing a lot of outlook and policy analysis.
Excellent. Good deal. Well, it's awesome to have your experiences on with us, and we're looking forward to your insights on the ag markets. But before we do, Paige, if you would kindly timestamp the broadcast. It is Thursday morning. Grain and feed markets have had a week to digest the WASDE report from last week. They also had that 3-day weekend to sift through some of those numbers, opening the markets back up on Monday night into Tuesday's trade date. We had another firm session on Tuesday. You might recall markets kind of rallied into that WASDE report Thursday into the afternoon and then weekend. Yesterday pulled back a little bit, maybe on some more macro type news, but today we're chopping around a little. Corn at the moment, old crop, is hovering above 680 still. It's trying to hold these fresh highs from that WASDE report. New crop corn flirting with $6 on the December futures contract. Meal trying to pull back a little bit as well. So bouncing back and forth a little bit the soybean market today. So interesting type of movements here as we head into the end of this week. Scott, we brought up the meal market there. It has been extremely firm. It's been a fun one for Jake and I to work with and attempt to service our dairymen and livestock producers. It's been an interesting last 6 to 8 weeks, really. We had that EPA draft proposal, which normally I feel like is quietly released, but it did not give us a quiet reaction to the marketplace. So soybean oil futures at that moment ultimately went under severe pressure. Meal futures skyrocketed, and it has, of course, caused a bit of a pain point for a lot of protein buyers. Scott, you monitor these issues very closely with your work at the ASA, specifically with the impact on renewable diesel and how it affects soybean oil and soybean markets. Would you mind giving us your take on this subject?
Yeah, thank you, Jim. So I'm going to compare what's going on right now in this sector a little bit to a drama, unfortunately, with real consequences. We had the early stages where it was all good news, right? It's like any drama. You're setting up, you're meeting your characters, and really the new entry into this was renewable diesel, as you mentioned. So most of your listeners are probably familiar with biodiesel. It's been around for a while, generally made with soybean oil. Well, renewable diesel is similar to biodiesel, but it is not biodiesel. It is chemically different, and it meets the same standards as petroleum-based diesel. So it can be used at 100% drop-in just fine, run through pipelines with petroleum diesel. So there's some definite advantages that it has. Not that biodiesel doesn't have some of its own, but we've seen a lot of excitement in the biofuel space over this. A lot of traditional petroleum companies are jumping in to produce biodiesel. They can lower their carbon footprint with it. And a lot of the market was destined for California, where it was consumed out there in a low carbon fuel standard. And so, to put some of the context with some numbers about what's going on, we've had about 2.5 billion gallons of biodiesel capacity in the country. There are announcements for up to 7 billion gallons of renewable diesel capacity. So, announcements for almost 3 times our capacity with biodiesel over the next few years. Now, not all those are probably going to get built. It's probably aspirational. But a lot of them are underway and will happen. But if we're going to produce more renewable diesel, more biofuels, we need more feedstock. And so this is really where soybeans comes into this picture. The industry was expanding significantly to provide those feedstocks. There's announcements for new or expanding soybean crush capacity for on the order of 25 plants, if you include some of the ones that have already completed. And that would add about a third increase to the crushing capacity in this country. So quite a bit. Now, again, those are announcements, so not all of them have happened. But it's definitely had an effect on the markets. There's a lot of excitement, a lot of build out happening. And so I think that's the first part of the drama. Then December 1st happened, like you mentioned, with the EPA. EPA really gave us quite a surprise that I don't think really anyone saw coming. So I'm talking about billions of gallons of increased biofuels. EPA gave us about 60 to 70 million gallons a year increase in the obligations for blending. So billions coming online, 60 to 70 million a year, right? So you just can't absorb that. And so that was the big reaction. Whenever that happened, we saw soybean oil prices drop, which made push meal prices up. Because essentially, if you're a crushing plant and you can pull back and wait for EPA to make their final decision, you probably should. Because if we don't have this expansion in the renewable fuels, we're not going to need as much feedstock. So how did EPA get such a different number? It's a little bit of a technical story, but it's really an interesting one. They used USDA's 10-year baseline, which has to assume no increase in policy, or no change in policy, which means no increase in those blending levels. So essentially, EPA was looking at some numbers that assume no increase in blending levels, and they're saying, well, we can't really increase the blending because we won't have the soybean oil for it. Well, it's a very circular way reasoning that got us here. And so we are engaging right now with EPA. This is just the proposal. The final rules due out in June, but it is obviously very concerning. I mentioned the California market; they just can't absorb all that by themselves. It's really several layers of policies here. So if we don't have a fix in this, I think we will see a definite dampening of the expansion in the crush industry. I wouldn't say that all of it is going away, but we've already started to see the effects. We had $400 meal on the board before this happened. Look where meal prices are now. So it's definitely a big factor in the market. It's the tense point of the drama. We're hoping this story ends well. We're hoping EPA doesn't or realizes some of the issues with some of the proposal and makes some changes. But it's kind of work time right now for us, the biofuels groups, to really push on this to hopefully decrease some of the soybean meal costs for the listeners on the show.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We really appreciate that, Scott. The EPA announcement, did that catch you off guard? Because I know it caught myself, Jake, a handful of us. Did it catch you guys off guard as well?
It was not the number we were expecting. Yeah, so I was flying out actually early that morning when it was announced, and it hit while I was on a plane, and I was on the tarmac, frantically texting and trying to work through this. Yes, it was definitely a surprise. EPA even referenced some of the materials that we had submitted about the coming crush. So we knew they had that information, which was really made it even more surprising that they had some of this information they chose not to use in the final rule.
Very interesting. Well, we appreciate it. I like the metaphor in comparison to a drama. Obviously, Jake and I are hoping it does not end in tragedy because it's become somewhat of a horror film. As you noted, we were trading meal futures, close to $400 a ton, and we've taken the nearby. Today, we're trading the March futures at $475. That unfortunately feels like relief as of late. So we've been monitoring that very closely. Jake Kingsley, in terms of this subject really affecting us, you've been watching this very closely as well. It's been a tough go here, and as Scott noted, part of our discussions with dairymen and livestock producers over the last handful of months have been anticipating some of these increases in capacity of plants coming online. So as Scott noted, it might dampen that prospect if things don't change or if this draft proposal does not get revised the way we were anticipating initially. Jake, is there anything else that you're seeing in the marketplace this week when it comes to feeding our livestock and dairy cows in the country?
Well, we're seeing, at least in the short term, that the basis has remained somewhat firm. I think that's more in response to drier conditions in Argentina, probably, than anything. We cut the production number down there last week on the WASDE report, and then it looks like maybe their government issued another cut to that potentially. We'll have to wait till they get to harvest to really see how bad that is. Of course, we're expecting some exceptionally good numbers coming out of Brazil as they get to harvesting here in 3 weeks or so. So they'll offset a good chunk of what we lose in Argentina. And again, South America as a whole is going to have a very nice crop relative to what we had out of there last year. So I think some of these larger grain companies that have assets both here in the U.S. and down there are kind of just holding their cards for a little bit to see how those yields shake out before we see maybe any kind of a break in basis numbers here in the U.S. It's been still a little bit firm. But we have seen, I know a lot of folks have been dealing with difficulty getting or even getting offers for soy hulls and soy hull pellets. Sounds like maybe that's starting to loosen up a little bit. These guys maybe sold a little bit out over their skis early on in the feed year, and they're kind of getting that back underneath of them a little bit. So seeing a lot of the Midwest had soy hulls at $300 a ton or higher if they were available at all. Now we're hearing some 260, 270 type of numbers out there, and they're probing around looking for bids for the April forward stuff. So I think they've kind of got their positions lined out, and also this rain and precipitation out west looks like it's really setting up for a nice forage crop out there. So maybe that'll slow down some demand for some of these fiber products that have been hitting the rail in the Midwest to move to the Western feed markets. So we're seeing a little bit of cooling off and some opportunity in that stuff. We get through these next couple of weeks, get South America to harvesting and work out some of the rail logistics and other issues that we had there over the Christmas and New Year weeks. We may see a little bit of opportunity for some of these guys here. So
okay, good deal, Jake. Thank you for that. Yeah, it's definitely been an interesting stretch here just in the States. I think WASDE, at least in January, pivots us towards South America a bit more, but we've had some of our own weather relief and or issues depending on how strong that relief was out west. So it's been an interesting winter so far, or as Jake, you noted, maybe even a upcoming spring for you guys down there. So yeah, keep an eye on things weather-wise, both up here and down south as we move ahead and see how it impacts markets going forward. So team, excellent work today. Thank you very much. A big thanks to Scott Gerlt for joining the show. We hope to have you back. You might have heard Scott on the From the Furrow podcast back in late November when he was on with Britt O'Connell. Scott, that was probably right before the EPA announcement, actually.
That was, yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a different story that day when we did the podcast.
Yeah, exactly right. So a lot has changed. So we're very grateful you came on and took the time to be with us. We'd also like to thank Corey and the Everag Insights crew for their support. Thank you to Paige for her production magic. And thank you to the viewers for watching the grain feed. Contact information is on the screen, and that is also for the American Soybean Association as well. As always, we greatly appreciate your feedback. That is all for today. We'll see you next time on the Grain Feed.